So for those wondering which iPad I would recommend to most consumers in 2023, that would still be the iPad 9 because yes, the iPad 10 has been released, but do remember it's a lot more expensive and has many compromises. I reviewed it a while back and was disappointed. And so that's why I still highly recommend getting the iPad 9 because this has fallen down in price and it offers the basics and basically everything one needs with an iPad. So yeah, let's delve into how the iPad 9 fares in 2023. So let's begin with the biggest con, I guess, with the iPad 9, and that is the design of this. So yes, the iPad 10 had a big design change. It finally incorporated the 2018 iPad Pro design language. But of course, for this iPad, this is based on the 2013 iPad Air. So yes, it has thick bezels, it still has a home button on the front, and it does not look that modern compared to newer iPads. But I'll be honest guys, as someone who uses the 2017 iPad Pro that of course has a similar design, I actually don't mind the bezels and the home button because it's actually quite nice to have bezels on an iPad so that you can place your finger somewhere when using it. And also the home button does make multitasking on the device easier on the iPad, so yes, these actually aren't downgrades. And if you're wondering, the iPad 9 in this video is my brother's, and he's not once complained about the bezels or the home button, so I think for most of you guys, this design's gonna be completely fine. And ultimately for an iPad, it's still pretty lightweight and compact enough to carry around. However, moving to the display, you could argue this is actually a real con for the iPad because this has a panel that's not laminated. Now for those wondering what this is, basically, the outer glass on the iPad and the actual LCD panel have not been glued together, so that means there is an air gap on the device that you can clearly see. Now this does kind of hinder the watching experience, though again, my brother has never complained about this. He did not notice the air gaps, so yes, for regular consumers, this might be a non-issue. And I do want to mention that Apple thankfully did give us black bezels for all iPad 9 models, so even if you get it in silver, there's a black front, and that does hide the gap for the most part. And by the way, would like to remind you guys, like this video and subscribe for more content like this, it would be appreciated. But for those wondering, the actual panel itself is actually very good. It's 10.2 inches, it's got a resolution of 2160 by 1620 with a PPI of 264, it has 500 nits of brightness, it does not have P3 color support, but that's not a massive issue to be honest. And yeah, for watching YouTube or Netflix on this, the display's pretty good. Though I do want to mention the brightness can be an issue when outdoors, especially when there's no anti-reflective coating on this, so do bear that in mind. But yes, for the most part, the display is still good enough for most consumers. Now moving on to performance with this iPad, we have the A13 chip and 3 gigs of RAM, which actually is 3 generations behind the latest A series SoC, but do remember that because iPadOS is pretty lightweight and does not have that many features, especially for these base iPads, it runs like a dream on this iPad. I've had no performance issues, it's been perfect for most iPad use cases, and so yes, performance is a complete non-issue and it has not slowed down with the release of iPadOS 16. I will say though 3 gigs of RAM is not that great for an iPad. I have noticed apps don't stay in the background compared to my 4 gig iPad Pro, but apart from that, I've had no issues. And yeah, this again is pretty good for the price. And because it's still so fast, you should get years of support. I'm expecting at least 3 or 4 more versions of iPadOS for the device. So yeah, software-wise, you're going to be completely fine with this. Battery life is another big advantage with this iPad. My brother's a pretty heavy user and he does find this getting hours of screen on time, and yes, I know that all iPads have 10 hours of battery life, but I did see a drain test that did prove the iPad 9 does have better battery life than most other iPads, and that's because of the less power hungry chip, and also the display being 60Hz, and not ProMotion like the iPad Pros. So for students and those planning to use the iPads on the go, you should be completely fine because the battery life is fantastic. Now moving on to accessories, because we have the older design, that does mean you don't get some of the fancy accessories like Apple Pencil 2 support or the Magic Keyboard. But that's not a big issue because the Gen 1 pencil still works fine for the most part. Yes, it has a horrible charging method, but thankfully, unlike the iPad 10, you can just charge this with the iPad itself. because the iPad 9 does still have a lightning port. And so yeah, considering the Gen 1 pencil can be found for cheap, this is a good accessory for this iPad. However, the Smart Folio keyboard is something you should avoid because it's overpriced, it does not protect the iPad, the key travel's pretty bad, and so I would go for Logitech's keyboards instead. They are very good, and they're very similar to the Magic Keyboard Folio Apple sells for the iPad 10, but of course at a much lower price. And so yes, accessories wise, the iPad 9 still has a good selection. I do want to mention though that for those who plan to use this with the Apple Pencil on a regular basis, do remember that because of the air gap, it's not as responsive as newer iPads. However, once again, my brother has not complained once about this, so if you're not a techie, to be honest, I doubt you're going to see much of a difference between this and the newer iPads. And by the way, for those wanting to push this iPad, maybe do some light video editing or music production on this, my brother actually does occasionally do this on this iPad and has had no issues for the most part. And so yes, you can push this, though personally I would recommend getting an iPad Pro instead if you have a more intensive workflow, because while the A13's good, having that additional power with the M series chips is gonna be pretty handy. And to be fair, that's not the market the iPad 9's for. This is for students and basic iPad users, and so for that demographic, this iPad's perfect performance-wise. Now moving to the cameras and mics, Apple's kinda nailed everything here because yes, the rear camera is not that great. It's a small 8-megapixel camera that does not have 4K video support or Smart HDR like newer iPads, but do remember that most people are not taking photos on a regular basis with their iPads. They have iPhones for that, and so for scanning documents and basic camera usage, this is still plenty good. And if anything, the FaceTime camera is more important, and thankfully Apple has given us the best of the best tech for this. We have the same 12-megapixel ultra-wide the iPad Pro has, with the center stage tech, so that means it tracks you around the room when on a call, which is pretty nice. And yeah, this is simply fantastic for Zoom calls, and the same goes for the mics. Now audio-wise, this actually does have much inferior speakers compared to newer iPads, and so I was expecting to be disappointed by these, but I'll be honest, when testing this iPad for this review, I was actually quite impressed with the speakers. Yes, they fly on one side, and they're not quad speakers, but they do the job for the most part. If you're going to be watching YouTube videos and Netflix, the speakers are completely fine for that. And do remember, most are using AirPods with iPads. They just need to be good enough for occasional use, and that's definitely the case. So for those in education looking to buy the 15-inch MacBook Air, there is great news because the back-to-school offer is now available in the US. This, for those unaware, is an annual deal Apple does, where they offer some extras if you purchase a Mac or iPad. And here's a quick video mic test for you guys on the iPad 9. Now moving to Touch ID on this iPad, this actually is a big advantage this iPad has compared to newer iPads, because while I do like Face ID on the iPhone, I will say it's much nicer to have Touch ID on the iPad because I often block the Face ID scanners when holding the iPad. I actually prefer how Touch ID is implemented on this. It works flawlessly and I've had no issues. Now I know the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth spec on this iPad is worse compared to new models, but I've had no issues. AirPods connect seamlessly to these, and yes, I occasionally see Wi-Fi not being as good as new iPads we have in the house, but it's not a massive deal breaker. And also Wi-Fi wise, my brother's never complained about the speeds, and so yeah, it should be fine for most consumers. And the same goes for the lack of 5G because, let's be honest guys, most are not getting cellular iPads, and even if you are, you don't need 5G because 4G is still pretty good. You're not getting millimeter wave on these iPads, and so yeah, that's not a massive issue. And finally, you do have the lightning port on this, the last ever new iPad to release with this port. And while yes, USB-C is a nice upgrade, I doubt many regular consumers buying this are going to be using peripherals with this. You're most likely only charging the iPad with the port, and so yeah, Lightning's fine for that. If you need better speeds, then get yourself one of the iPad Pros. But ultimately guys, while this iPad might not have the latest specs, do remember no other iPad beats the value this offers, because you can easily find this from third-party retailers for under $300, sometimes even $250. That's pretty insane. And here in the UK, you can find it for under £300. And so yeah, no iPad comes close to the value this offers, and for those using the iPad for basic stuff like watching YouTube, Netflix, and some occasional web browsing, this iPad's more than good enough, and I highly recommend getting this in 2023. And also do remember, this was actually the first regular iPad that got a storage increase. Before this release, you had 32 gigs of base storage, which was pretty tight, whereas 64 gigs should be fine for most consumers. And hey, if you need more storage, you could probably get yourself the 256 gig version and still come under the price of a new base iPad 10. So yes, this iPad's terrific value. But that's about it, guys. If you have any further questions regarding this iPad, let me know in the comments. Anyways, thank you for watching, guys. Make sure to like and subscribe for the latest Apple news and rumors. And on that note, I'll see you guys in the next one.